Hope everyone had a nice warm Shabbos. So we're continuing our study of Mesilas Yesharim, and we're in the middle of chapter 13, and we're talking about precious or abstinence, that sometimes in a person's spiritual growth, he or she has to abstain from something even when it is technically permitted according to Torah law. And over Hanukkah, on Ma'osur, when we sang Ma'osur, after we lit the menorah, we sang Nasa Nes La Shayshanim, that Hashem did a miracle for the Shayshanim, for the roses. The Jewish people are compared to a rose. Now the reason is, why are Jews compared to a rose? Out of, can compare us to anything, but why specifically a rose? A rose has thorns, which protects its flower. And in the Torah, the rabbis make laws which protect the Torah. The rabbis make certain gedarim, what they're called in Hebrew, certain safeguards, that in order that we don't violate the Torah law itself. For example, the Torah says we're not allowed to cook meat and milk together and eat meat and milk together. So even though it's just talking about meat from a cow, the rabbis, according to most opinions, came along and said you also shouldn't eat chicken and milk because chicken looks very similar to meat, and if we would allow chicken parmesan, someone might come and eat veal parmesan. And the Torah itself, according to Rambam, says there's a mitzvah on the rabbis to make laws to protect the Torah. And it's actually the Torah actually commands the rabbis to do this, according to the Rambam. And that's why the Jewish people are compared to a rose, because a rose has a beautiful flower, and the thorns protect the rose, so too the rabbinic laws protect the Torah. So now the Ramchal asks a very obvious question. We've been learning this whole time for the past several weeks that it's important to take upon ourselves, if we want to grow spiritually, to not overindulge in physicality and to refrain from certain physical pleasures, even though the Torah never forbade them specifically. But the Ramchal now is going to ask, well, if we're not supposed to be doing it, if we're supposed to be refraining from these activities, why didn't the rabbis come along and forbid it? The rabbis came along and forbade many things. So why not also forbid these additional things that we're learning about in Precious? So the Ramchal says, Ve'im tishal v'taimer, and if you'll ask, now that we're saying that precious is necessary, it's an important thing, that's what we've been talking about the past several weeks, that we can't just live life according to the letter of the law, but we have to want to grow in our spirituality, and that entails doing things going beyond what the Torah says. But if it's important to do these things, because they're essential for our spiritual growth, why didn't the rabbis make it official? Why didn't they say, you can't do this? We kept giving the example of somebody who eats too much. He focuses too much on food, and he always eats fine delicacies. So why didn't the rabbis come out and forbid eating fancy food too often? Something like that. They made many laws. They should have made it here too. However, the answer is simple and obvious. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah says that the rabbis only make laws if the majority of the Jewish people are able to fulfill them. Only those types of laws the rabbis make. So even though it might have been, it's a good thing spiritually to refrain from certain physical things which are allowed, since the entire Jewish people is not capable of living on such a high level, the rabbis never made the law. Most of the Jewish people are not able to be Chasidim. It's enough that they be tzaddikim. We mentioned earlier that Chasidim, to be a Chassid, it doesn't mean like the Chasidim in Borough Park. It means Chasidim means very, very pious people that live their lives above the letter of the law. So the entire Jewish people isn't fit that every area of their life can be living above the letter of the law, because we're all on different levels. We're all on different steps in the ladder of our spiritual growth. But he does say the Jewish people could be tzaddikim. Tzaddikim are righteous people that fulfill all of the Torah. Now, to fulfill all the Torah all the time, that's a tall order also. But Hasidim are even above that. Not only do they fill every letter of the Torah all the time, but they go above and beyond and do what's not even required of them. Now, they make a point on the bottom here that it doesn't mean that all of us can't be Hasidim in certain areas. It might be that we can't be Hasidim in the entire Torah, but he says that each of us can have an area where we specifically can grow more than other areas. There might be some part of our lives where we can go above the letter of the law, even though we're not ready in our entire lives in every area, to be super religious and super spiritual in every single area of our lives. But he does say on the bottom here, makes a good point, that really we could pick one area or one specific thing where we want to grow and where we want to get better in, and we could be Hasidim in that area. For example, maybe someone wants to make a rule for himself that he's always going to be at synagogue 5 or 10 minutes before davening. Something like that. He's not required to get there early, but he does that. That's something that he feels that he can do to go above the letter of the law, or whatever it is, because since we're all different, we all have areas that it might be easier for us to grow than other areas, or it might be a little harder for us. But the general idea is also that even though we're all on different steps of the ladder, as long as we're growing and as long as we're making an effort to get better, that's really what's important. Ach hasridim asher ba'am. However, the specific people, so while the entire Jewish people can't be, totally pious and go above the letter of the law in every area, but there are a minority of people. But he says there are certain individuals that can go above and beyond and merit to get close to Hashem, and they have that desire, and they do that. And then the rest of the Jewish people will actually benefit from what they do. The rest of the Jewish people benefits from what holy people do. There's actually, the Ramchal writes in his Sefer Derech Hashem, which we learn on Wednesday nights. If anyone's interested, please message me. I can give you information about that shir. That sometimes the suffering of a tzaddik, when a tzaddik suffers like the most righteous person in the generation, it can actually be an atonement for the rest of the generation, his suffering. And all Jews are connected. We're all Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. We are all interconnected. So we don't just look at each other in a vacuum. But he's saying here that those holy people helps the rest of the Jewish people in their schus. We're not living on an island. When a Jew does a good thing, it positively impacts the entire Jewish people. And these people are fulfilling this level of piety that the other people can't. This is what Hashem wanted. It's impossible that you'll have an entire nation on the same spiritual level. Every person is going to be on a different level according to his particular intellect. But those Yechidei Skula, those individuals that are on a very high level, and through these holy spiritual people, it will also affect the rest of the Jewish people, and it'll cause that God's presence will rest in the entire Jewish people, not only on these individuals. It's a famous drasha that we mentioned about the Lulav, that there are 4 parts of the Lulav. Right, there are 4 different parts of the Lulav representing different types of Jews, and the holiest type of Jews will atone for the other Jews that aren't on that level. And that's what we mentioned, what the Ramchal writes in Derech Hashem, similar to that. Ukfar matzanu Eliyahu zocher latov she'amar le Yeshua ben Levi b'maisa de Ula bar Koshev k'sheheshivu v'lo mishnahu afu amar lo v'chi mishnas chasidim hi. He brings a Gemara in Yerushalmi where a certain rabbi, the halacha is that if the Romans came and they said, unless you give us this Jewish person we're looking for, we're going to destroy the entire city. He was wanted by the Romans, so the halacha was that you're supposed to give that person over to save the entire city. So the rabbi did that. But then Eliyahu said to him, why'd you do that? So he said, that's what the halacha is. So Eliyahu answered that that's the halacha for a regular person, but you're a very special person, so there's some more expected of you, right? We can't just. There's also something we've mentioned before, that we can never measure ourselves based on anybody else, because we really only can measure ourselves against ourselves. God gave us certain talents and certain strengths, and perhaps we can't say that, oh, I'm better than that guy, I'm doing better than him. Well, maybe God didn't give him those strengths, so God expects more of you. In this case, even though this rabbi wasn't able to just follow the letter of the law because he was on a higher spiritual level. Now, something we mentioned earlier, several weeks ago actually, was that there's some types of precious abstinence which is good, and some types of precious which is bad. So we've been talking about the good type of precious until now, where I abstain from physical things, I abstain from things that are allowed, because they might lead me astray to sin. We said that if a person is always eating all day and that's what he focuses on, eventually it's going to lead him to do sins and to eat forbidden foods and to forget his spiritual service of Hashem. So that's a good thing when we distance ourselves from what's allowed in that respect. But what is bad precious? When is it a bad thing to separate from the physical world? Because in the end of the day, God put us in a physical world and he expects us to benefit from it. But what is he says the bad precious is what the fools do, that it's not enough that they not only do they refrain from the extra things in life, but they also refrain from what their body needs, right? They go on fasts that they fast where it comes to the point where they can't function regularly and things like that. And that's not what Hashem wants. Hashem doesn't want us to inflict our bodies where it comes to a point where it's detrimental to living our lives, right? It's not good to fast too much because then you can't focus on avodas Hashem. On the contrary, the rabbis say, it's forbidden for a person to inflict himself. It says a pauper who doesn't take charity, it's like he's killing somebody. If a person is poor and he's in a place where he needs to take charity, it's very wrong for him to say, oh, it's below my dignity to take charity. No, God says if you're poor, then take charity. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. And in fact, it says if you don't take charity, it's like you're murdering. It says, it says you have to be a living being. And the soul, God says, the soul that I gave you, you have to keep it alive. It says someone who sits in a fast is called a sinner. And they said that's when it's talking about somebody who's not able to handle a fast, right? If someone thinks he's being very holy by fasting the whole day, and it causes him physical problems by doing that, and he can't focus on his job or focus on learning, then he shouldn't be doing that. He's a sinner. Hillel said, "Gaimel nafsho ish chesed al achilas haboker v'ayrochitz panav yadav l'chvod kono kal v'chaymer mediyuk nos hamalachim." Hillel talked about the importance of eating in the morning and of washing oneself and staying clean, just like the angels watch. It says it's a kal v'chaymer that the angels watch themselves. So all the more so, we need to wash our faces because we are created in the image of God. So if the angels need to wash themselves, so all the more so us, who are created in the image of God, we need to wash ourselves. So we see that we're supposed to take care of our bodies. That's what it comes down to. So bad precious is when we inflict ourselves and we refrain from the physical world to the point where it's damaging to us and we're not being healthy. But the good precious is when we refrain from those physical things which could lead us to sin. Not overeating, not being engaged too much in the physical, not having physicality as a goal in life. This is the true rule. So he says anything which is not necessary for a person in the physical world, it's fitting for him to refrain from it. And anything which is necessary for him, he has to use it. And if he refrains from those things which are necessary for his physical existence, then he's called a sinner. So how are we supposed to use the physical world? We're supposed to use the physical world, whatever is necessary for us, to serve Hashem. If we do more than that, that's not good. If we do less than that, then we're called sinners. And just in parentheses also, for someone just to say, tomorrow I'm only going to use only things in the physical world that are necessary for my existence, and to just refrain from all enjoyment, that is not a good thing to just do overnight. This is something that if a person wants to work towards and take small steps, like small baby steps with a spiritual advisor, but not just to wake up tomorrow and saying, I'm only going to eat bread and water and just to sustain my body. That is not an intelligent thing to do. Hine, Zek Klal Neman, this is the trustworthy principle. He says he's only telling us the general principle, but he's not telling us the details. The details depend on a person's wisdom. He has to decide for himself what he's supposed to do. According to his intellect, he'll be praised. It's impossible to write all the details here because there's many of them. A person has to evaluate each thing in its specific time. So again, we learned in this chapter, we just finished chapter 13, precious is that we refrain from extra physical things that are not necessary for our survival. And the reason that we do that is because any physical thing could lead us to sin. However, if we refrain from physical things that we need, then we are called sinners. And the idea is that we take small baby steps in this area, and we can't be expected to just refrain from everything overnight. But just if we have the mindset that our goals in life should be spiritual in nature, and to know that God put us here for a reason to get close to Him, and we should be making every effort that we can to take a step higher and higher on that ladder, then we are doing the right thing. And next week, God willing, we will start with chapter 14, and I hope everyone has a beautiful week.